Hey everyone, Satanno here for the third installment of my gaming log. Thanks for showing up. It's been 3 weeks in a row now, so as mentioned in my comments before, I'm starting to feel ready to take a little bit of credit for my project here. Again, I'd like to give a shout out to my friend Scott for being the motivator behind this whole project, and for my buddy the Bean Burrito, who's been kicking my ass to get this thing done every week, so thanks for that. I'd also like to give a shout out to my friend the Joseph Finks, who has been engaging me on last week's topic via email every day almost since I put this thing up, so thanks for that. I really don't know what I'm trying to accomplish here with this project, but just reading the comments and seeing that you guys are watching my videos and enjoying it really makes me feel like it's something that's worth putting my effort into. So thanks for that. Last week I said my piece in brief about bigotry in gaming. Lo and behold, less than 24 hours after my video went up, a storm erupted over Gearbox lead designer John Hemingway referring to a skill tree for the upcoming Necromancer DLC for the unreleased Borderlands 2 as girlfriend mode. Now, I know there's a whole slew of opinion ranging from the kind of knee-jerk idiocy that decries any attempts to temper offensive language as restriction of freedom, all the way to almost equally offensive claims of an intentional misogynistic conspiracy among developers. And I'd like to take this opportunity to highlight 2 points that I made last week. First point, what Hemingway did was vocalize in perhaps the worst possible situation one of the most sadly ubiquitous assumptions in gaming today. Now, whether or not any or all of the anecdotal evidence about women being inferior gamers to men is irrelevant. I don't think that Hemingway is anti-woman, and I really don't believe that he intended to belittle or marginalize female gamers in any way. But it is a perfect example of what I was talking about, that this mentality is so deeply entrenched in gaming culture that people don't even realize that they're perpetuating it. Second point, the reactions drawn from all sides of this affair really highlight just how reactionary people are being on this issue. Of course, you had the old guard on one side trying to paint offended gamers as overreacting across the entire issue. Now, I won't say that some measure of the response wasn't taking things a bit too far, but brushing the whole thing aside is really callous. The event drew enough fire that Gearbox CEO Randy Pitchford tweeted a response. Sadly, many observers, myself included, seem to believe that the response falls somewhere between PR damage control and Pitchford merely standing up for one of his own guys. Now, Hemingway's personal response was quite similar, although it was quite more verbose. Now, I can appreciate Pitchford not throwing Hemingway to the wolves, but it wouldn't have been so much harder simply to say, John Hemingway made a poor choice of words which angered many people. Neither he nor any of the staff here believe women to be inferior in any way, and we all apologize for presenting that impression. I mean, seriously, you're adults. When you screw up, just admit it. Half-assed backpedaling is for children and for politicians. So let's try and present a more mature face, yeah? With that out of the way, this week I want to approach a slightly less incendiary topic, and that is the beginning of the end of the current crop of consoles. The current generation are roughly 7 years old, and people across the spectrum of involvement are beginning to wonder when the next slab of electronics are going to be unleashed upon the public. Thus far, only Nintendo has released anything substantial in the form of their horribly, horribly named Wii U. If I can rant for just a minute, this is the worst name for a console I have ever heard. It's worse even than the savagely unimaginative PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3. I mean, the Wii name was clever for a lot of reasons, largely revolving around the idea of togetherness implied by the first-person plural pronoun we. Now, why would you intentionally subvert that by tacking on the second-person singular you? Not only does it sound stupid, it just doesn't even make any sense anymore. Now, I was one of a minority, or at least as far as I can tell, who thought that not only was the Wii a clever name, but also predicted that Nintendo would make out like bandits with this console. Sadly, I seriously doubt that they can recreate the magic in the same way, but I am prepared to be surprised. In case you're unaware, the Wii U is going to support controllers that have touchscreens slapped down right in the middle of the controller. Now, I'd be lying if I said that wasn't exciting, but like many others, I am worried about pricing. Unless they come in at a very low price, their worst enemy isn't going to be Microsoft or Sony, but rather their own audience. See, Nintendo single-handedly introduced gaming to the non-gaming masses. The big question is, are those same people going to be ready to cough up the dough for the next iteration? My gut says not for anything more than $275, and even that's pushing it. Now, they do seem to have a strong launch lineup, including a lot of third-party support, which is a surprising change, but I'm worried that the big end will get sucked in the same kind of graphical arms race that created the less-than-stellar GameCube. Not that I dislike the GameCube, but historically, Nintendo has done better when they let that beautiful genius Shigeru Miyamoto do his thing. All hail Miyamoto. So that leaves us with the leaders of this generation. And it's funny, right? I mean, so many magazines, websites, and fanboys like to talk about how Sony and Microsoft are being in this life-or-death struggle when Nintendo has sold more than double both companies combined. How does that work? Anyway, these two companies are being quite hush-hush. So, what is Sony going to do? Well, let me preface this section by saying that you're looking at a guy who paid $400 for a first-run PlayStation 2 and over $600 for a first-run PlayStation 3. So, I'm either a rabid fanboy or a jaded-ass dude. And sadly, the latter is true right about now. The PS3 in its first incarnation was a grossly over-engineered monstrosity. Entering the market at that price point was completely absurd, and the sales figures since then have proven that out. And I firmly believe that the opening gambit there is what cost Sony their crown that they earned in the PS2 era more than anything else. Given my experience over the past 10 years with Japanese culture and business structure, I have serious doubt that much will change. Make no mistake, I believe the mistakes that Sony made out of the gate with this generation were very likely the result of a grumpy 70-year-old man in a cheap suit declaring, "They will pay this price because we are Sony." Now, Sony Computer Entertainment and Sony Computer Entertainment America especially have gained influence since then, but the grumpy old men in Tokyo still hold the keys to the castle. I believe that unless Sony Computer Entertainment is given total autonomy, the PlayStation 4 will not be launched at a price less than $500. See, Sony is probably going to try to leverage the only division they have that's regularly generating a profit, and that division is going to suffer for this strategy. Now, before I forget, I will bet you good money that they go with the name PlayStation 4 this time around as well. But please, Sony, surprise me. The one thing that I am truly holding out hope for is that they let the Move die a quiet death. If you don't think the Move was anything more than a shallow attempt to cash in on the wave that Nintendo started, you're naive. I don't care how charismatic Kevin Butler is. It was a really lame move, no pun intended, and it really shows. The sooner Sony forgets that mess and focuses on hardware that actually enhances gaming, the better. If I had to hazard a guess, I would say that Sony releases more tech specs and a launch date before Microsoft does. Now, I don't think the PS4 is going to be the same technological leap that the PS3 was, and I think that's going to be one of their major hurdles that they face coming into the next generation. Mitigating that is a very strong first-party software support they've built up. Sony now owns or has exclusive deals with a wealth of top-quality development studios, and it will be that strength, coupled with the expansion of PSN to more indie studios, that will allow Sony to step out ahead of Microsoft. Speaking of Microsoft, I think one thing is for certain with their next Xbox console, and that is that they're not going to let the Kinect die. And honestly, I'm glad for it. Although the Kinect was a cash-in attempt like the Move, the Kinect is some interesting shit. I mean, that is some sci-fi Star Trek action going on there with you waving your hands and talking to it to make it go. Of course, it's far from perfect, but it is also hella cool. So I'm really genuinely curious to see what creative developers are going to do with it, especially when the hardware and the software are improved. Now, any of you who know me know that I am not giving Microsoft a single cent of my money for their faulty hardware again. The red ring of death hit me personally, and for the sake of everyone, I really hope that Microsoft learns something from that situation. But never underestimate the drive to save a couple of bucks. Anyway, In terms of raw power, I think Microsoft is actually in a slightly better position simply because the 360 is nowhere nearly as potent as the PS3. There's simply more room for improvement. Since the bread and butter of the Xbox crowd tends to be first-person shooters, graphical prowess is going to be one of the top priorities they have. With that in mind, I think Microsoft is going to throw a curveball out there and spend their efforts not touting the muscle under the hood, but rather what I think of as ancillary functions. I'm talking about Netflix, Hulu, Facebook, whatever. Not gaming in particular, but entertainment in general. And so far, the PR being thrown out there does seem to indicate that that's the aim for the company. Now, personally, I don't give a rat's ass about any of that crap, but apparently someone's making enough money off of this to make it important to them. So, really, let's just say that as long as something that has Halo or Gears of War written on it launches with the next box, they're going to do fine. I mean, so far, shoot more stuff on the Xbox seems to have been working pretty well for them, right? I know I've rambled on a bit here, and ironically enough, it's not even strategy or specs that really interests me. What I really want to ask is, do we need a new cycle of consoles? I mean, I love hardware like that as much as the next guy, more so in fact. I own a PS3, a 360, a Wii, a DS, a 3DS, a PSP, and a gaming PC. I'm thinking about getting a Vita, but that's still not quite in the cards. But right now, there's plenty to play across the board that I haven't even touched, so I've got to ask, who exactly is screaming for a new TV box? I'm willing to admit that I'm an old man now and can't rip through games at the same rate that I did in college. But these days, especially if you're into multiplayer, which I'm not for the record, there are a ton of great games out there, and more still waiting to be released. Consider further that some of the games that are making the biggest waves these days are not games with more flash, but smaller indie titles being released on XBLA and PSN. Games with less glitz, but more style. Games that are lower res, but higher concept. Little less Michael Bay, little more Stanley Kubrick. Even then, there are still some very exciting things in the works from major studios which continue to disprove the claims that we've been hearing for quite some time now that they've wrung every last bit of power they can out of the existing architecture. Personally, I recommend taking a look at The Last of Us or Beyond Two Souls, as these are two titles that I'm really excited about. And just in case you think I'm some kind of gaming hipster here, I gotta say that my nipples are getting hard just thinking about how close Borderlands 2 is to release. My final point to consider on the topic is whether or not the market can support new hardware. As I mentioned earlier, Sony is quite notorious for dropping absurd price tags with their consoles. No matter what Microsoft decides to put inside their next device, it won't be cheap either. Even if we step outside the realm of reality and assume that all the consoles from the big three launch at a price tag under $300, are enough people going to be ready to justify spending that kind of cash? I mean, no matter what country you look at, economics times these days look pretty bleak. With so much still readily available for all the existing hardware, coupled with the low odds of a serious jump in power like we saw this time around, I'm not entirely sure that there's going to be the same kind of demand that the last generation enjoyed. Well, that's my short-ish take on what the next generation of consoles is going to be about. I'm really curious to see what you all think, and of course, if there's something that you would like to hear me opine about, please drop a message in the comments. I'd really like to hear it. Looking forward to engaging in more discussion on the topic. So, thanks for tuning in again, and I hope we'll see you next week.